Hello, my name is Sandy Adomaitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, on today's show we have Kevin Bachar, an Emmy-winning documentary director and screenwriter. Kevin has been on the pod before talking about his horror film, The Inhabitant, which you can watch on Amazon Prime, Hulu, and Apple Plus. Kevin also joined us to talk about his book, Dredge 22 Tales of Terror. He's back again to talk about his latest book, The Visitor. By the way, if you've watched Shark Week, National Geographic's, or PBS, you've seen Kevin's work. He's the idiot, those are Kevin's words, not mine, in the water with sharks or crawling in caves, filming vampire bats. Let's start the show. Kevin, welcome back to the Writers Hangout.
Hey, Sandy, thanks for having me.
Kevin, can you please tell the writers out there about The Visitor?
Sure. I started writing short story collections during the writer's strike, and the natural progression was, okay, can you write a novel? And that's what I did. I started cranking out a book, and soon enough, it was finished. And it became what's known as The Visitor, which is on Amazon right now. And it's a horror story, as you can imagine, since that's sort of the genre I work in. And it's about a woman, a writer, who is dealing with two horrors, the horror of her past. She was the victim of an abusive parent, or parents, I should say. And the thing she does to get rid of that abuse is she's going to write a book about it. And the best place for her to write is to leave New York City, where she exists with her trusted companion, a dog named Mobo, short for Maureen Bojangles. And they head to the family cabin in upstate New York. And during this trip up to New York during a snowstorm, she encounters the visitor, which is a horrifying presence. Mm-hmm. She starts to see little strange things on her hike to the cabin. There's a terrible snowstorm, so she has to leave her car by the main road and do the half-mile hike up the driveway or road to her cabin. And along the way, she starts seeing different things and hearing different sounds, and her dog reacts, but she keeps plowing through the snow to get to the cabin. And once inside the cabin, she's there, and she's also waiting for her boyfriend to come up from New York. And that's when, as I mentioned, she encounters the visitor.
The way you set it up, I wasn't sure which way it was going to go. And I love how you introduce the visitor. You mentioned the dog, Maureen Bojangles. Now, that is an exciting name for a dog. Is there a story behind it?
Here's the story, and this is going to maybe sound a little weird, but it's been the genesis of a few of my stories over the years, is I literally put my head to pillow one night to go to sleep, and for some reason, the name Maureen Bojangles came into my mind.
Really?
And I was sort of like, Maureen Bojangles, what is that? Is that a real name? How could that be a real name? That sounds kind of funny. It sounds like one of those names that you hear when you're watching the dog show and they say Maureen Bojangles Jingles the Third. And this is what's going in my mind as my head's to pillow. And I'm going, well, why are you thinking about this dog? Who is this dog, Maureen Bojangles? And then I was sort of like, well, what would this dog, it wouldn't be Maureen Bojangles. Nobody would ever say Maureen Bojangles every time you called the dog. So it would be Mobo. So, well, why are you thinking about this Mobo? Well, must be because this dog is a really important dog and did something special. And I was sort of like, well, what did they do? Save somebody's life? Again, this is the conversation in my brain. And I was sort of like, well, dogs save people's lives all the time. That's special, but it's not that special. And then I said, well, what if this dog maybe saved the world? What if there was something this dog did that saved the world? And well, how could a dog save the world? And that's kind of what started this off.
I also thought of Cujo. Did you think of Cujo whenever you say Mojo?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I probably subconsciously did. I hadn't even thought of it until now. My guess is subconsciously I did do that, since I am a huge Stephen King fan. And that's one of my favorite books. And in many ways, it kind of mirrors this book in terms of a woman in peril, a
Yes.
contained space.
Yes.
And with Stephen King, I also like to create characters that are rich and maybe somewhat damaged, and have redemption at the end of the book. And so that's what I hope The Visitor has, is not only a kind of a catchy premise, but also a great character that you're cheering for and care about.
And you succeeded. Now, how about Sally and Harry?
That it was Sally was her name when I started writing it. And then when the boyfriend's name came about, I was like, well, wouldn't it be funny if his name was Harry? And people would say that to them. And so it would be Sally and Harry, just like the movie. And
Oh, I'm so glad it's for the
yeah,
movie.
and it's sort of
Yay.
like, oh, that would be funny. And people would always mention that when they met him. And so I worked that into the book a little. But yeah, that was sort of like, oh, wouldn't that be funny if his name was Harry and she was Sally?
Before we go any further, could you read from The Visitor and its dealer's choice?
Okay. Sally is heading up to the cabin from New York. And as she's heading to the cabin, we learn about her past and her lives and life, and where she's gone and where she's traveled, and about her boyfriend. And we also hear a story of her encounter with a poacher who was on her land. And this is a part of that. So this is from The Visitor. The poacher stood on the other side of the creek, his rifle's barrel laid over his shoulder, his eyes on Sally as she stepped out of the tree line to the edge of the water. He was dressed in camo, his face painted green and black. Sally thought he looked like a Navy SEAL sniper out on maneuvers searching for some enemy's hideout. Jesus, he's one of those types. I would bet all the money in the world that he never was in the military, but dresses the part to pretend they were. While others were fighting in some godforsaken desert halfway across the world, he was probably spanking fraternity pledges with a canoe paddle. What a loser. His features were obscured by the distance and the face paint. So Sally didn't have a clue how old he was, but he was tall, about 6'3", broad-shouldered, big enough to drag a deer out to his car, or Sally. He'd probably just bury me, digging out a shallow grave and tossing some rocks over my body, but not before prying the bullet out of my chest with a knife to not leave any evidence it was him. Then he'd throw Mobo on top. At least we'd be together. Thoughts of her carved-up body didn't stop Sally from going on the offensive. She didn't smooth-talk him or appeal to his sense of right or wrong. It was straight for the jugular as Sally closed the space between them. Can't you read? There are like 50 no trespassing signs all over this mountain. You're breaking the law. I want you gone or I'm calling the cops. You're on my property, mine. Do you understand? He stood motionless, like a statue as Sally got closer, silent. He didn't even seem to blink. She repeated her scree, with some added flair and kicking up the volume of her voice. Sally pointed, too, right at him, figuratively jamming her finger into his chest from 30 feet away. Seriously, are you freaking blind? There are signs posted everywhere. Big red letters spelling out no trespassing. I know you can read. You drove up here, probably following signs that had words on them. So you aren't illiterate, which means you're willfully ignoring legal postings. I'm going to call the state police. Sally was shouting and walking. She was just a bus length away from the poacher when she stopped moving towards him. He coughed and shifted his weight from his right foot to his left as if he was bored. He finally spoke. I didn't see nothing. For all I know, I'm on state land, and you're the one who doesn't belong. Maybe you're the one trespassing. This could be kind of one of those he said, she said things. I want you gone now. You know what you need to do? I'm going to tell you. He laughed between his words. You need to calm down and ease up on the attitude. Then he swung the rifle off his shoulder and down to his waist. A threat. He smiled. White teeth, full grin. The kind of smirk someone flashes when they think they have it all figured out. When they appear to have the upper hand in an argument. Of course, his rifle played a huge part in that grinning confidence. Sally didn't have a gun or a weapon, but she had Mobo. Without drawing any attention to it, Sally gently unhooked Mobo from the leash. The pooch stood at Sally's side, and Mobo looked up to his friend and confident as she spoke to the poacher. It was as if the dog understood what Sally was saying. Yeah, you've got a gun, And I know I'm supposed to be terribly frightened, but you better be the best shot in the world. Some sort of male Annie Oakley or that sniper dude in Afghanistan, which you aren't since I don't see any dead deer around. In fact, you probably suck at shooting. So when you raise that gun, I'm going to do two things: duck and run into the forest, and then command my dog to rip your throat out. Since you can't hit a standing deer, I'm pretty sure you can't hit a charging dog if your life depended on it, and it will depend on it. Because my dog will be on you in 2 bounds and latch onto your jugular like a vice. And the last thing, let me make this perfectly clear, the last thing you'll see will be her white fangs about to clamp down on your neck. At which point, you will shit your pants and then feel your blood warm and flowing like a fire hose out of your neck. So it's your move, Slick. When Sally finished, Mobo's eyes moved off her friend to the intruder. The dog didn't snarl. She just stared at the hunter. Her view was unwavering. She instinctively knew that Sally needed her primal side, the protect the pack part of Mobo. The dog's calmness made her scarier. There was no bluster, just truth to her gaze. Mobo knew from the tone of Sally's voice that she needed to be in protection mode, ready to do anything to keep her best friend from harm. They were a pack, and the pack looked after one another. The canine had the aura of a track star waiting for the starting gun to fire. Slightly back on her haunches, her muscles twitching, ready to release. In about 3 seconds, Mo would be on the poacher, maybe less. She was an arrow wedged into a bowstring, pulled back and ready to hit its target. But the truth was, Sally was bluffing. She never put Mobo in harm's way. They had both run into the forest dodging bullets if he lifted his gun to shoot. But he didn't know that. They were playing poker.
I just absolutely love that scene.
Well,
Now,
thank you.
something else that you have in the book that I resonated with me is the clicking. And it's a form of communication. Did you play around with how the visitor was going to communicate?
For some reason, it was always going to be that clicking because I can't remember whether LA has them, but we get cicadas here late in the summer,
Yes.
which are these pretty big bugs, and they're pretty disgusting looking with these big eyes. And they make that sort of like clicking, vibrating sound. You could hear it. And maybe you're outside in the yard or somewhere, and all of a sudden it starts up. It could startle you at first. And there's something almost electronic to it. It's very different from a bird sound. And sometimes birds
Right.
can click. And it's a sound that sometimes triggers something in you that's like, oh, I got to get away from that. It's almost like I think I compare it in the book at one point, like a rattlesnake's rattle. There's something about it that sort of disturbs us a little.
Yes.
And so that was the idea of the clicking.
The way you crafted the book, in my opinion, that it could be adapted to film or a television series, because this is just the beginning for this series, correct?
Yes, it's going to be, it's a 3-book series called Houses of Horror, and it looks at places we live in, which we think we should be protected in. Our places then become where we're most vulnerable and sort of scary things can
Oh,
happen. So this is the
cool.
first book in that 3-part series. The next is The Crone, and then the final one is The Apartment. But yeah, I guess in a way, my writing style, and other people have said it, so thank you for picking that up. It's very astute of you.
Yeah, could you?
In that style, yeah.
Yeah, it could be a small budget. It can be a large budget. It could be a television series. Someone could make this as an indie film.
Mhm.
I mean, there's no big, gigantic party scene. When Sally leaves, she's not leaving her big job at the newspaper. It all could be filmed on a small budget. Did you do that on purpose? And could you
I
take us through any thought process as you're
Yeah,
writing?
I didn't do that on purpose. And I kind of mentioned a little earlier that sort of my writing style is kind of like a script style where it's not very flowery. I think if you heard what I just read, it's descriptive, but there's dialogue and it's kind of a dialogue driven many times. And I didn't think so much about like, oh, big party scene, I shouldn't have that, because part of her life is she's been isolated and she's felt this guilt
Right.
and she's felt sort of like an outsider. So she wouldn't be that sort of big thing, what you were talking about in terms of a big office and so forth. I didn't really write it with that in mind, but I will say in the scripts I write as well, I don't write too much of that big bombastic um, sort of stuff.
Did you read anything for inspiration while writing The Visitor? And writers out there, one of the best ways to get excited if you're starting a project is to go read books and see movies that are similar so you can get inspired, so you can get excited. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I did read Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World, which people are familiar with because it became the movie that came out, I think, last year or the year before, called Knock at the Cabin. Yeah, it was a Knock at the Cabin. It was the M. Night film. So I read Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World. I always reread Shirley Jackson, The Lottery and Haunting of Hill House. She has a great short story called The Bus. I recommend people seek that out. I read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote because I really love that book. And I hadn't read it in years. And it really helped me get to certain, how do you capture emotion in scenes? How can you capture emotion in descriptions? And that book does it really, really well. So that's a great question and a great
I'm sorry,
tip.
can I? I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to stop you there. You just can't throw In Cold Blood out there and us not talk about it. In Cold Blood, wow. I think I read it in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, when is the first time you read In Cold Blood?
I'm the same as you. I read it as high school. It was required reading. So I had not read it since high school.
What freaking high school did you go to that In Cold Blood was required reading? Did you go to Horror High?
No, it's a New York City high school. That's, it's a great book. It's a thriller. Plays elements of horror because of the horrific murders. I mean, it's a true story about the Cutter family.
Groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
Truman Capote, he created a style of writing that many authors depend on today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating book because it's a true story. He's writing basically a documentary sort of book, a nonfiction book about what happened and his experience going there to investigate this murder. But it reads as a novel. It reads as fiction. And so I recommend that to writers because you made a great point. Like, read other people's work to get inspired, to get sort of, oh, how do they do this? How do they do that? So great point.
Did you learn anything about yourself while writing The Visitor?
I think I did. The main character has had this history of abuse, so I did some research on that. And so I think I became more aware of what that can do to a person in terms of also myself. Hey, you could do this because, of course, you think, oh, a novel. Can I write a novel? And so you start it and then you finish it and you go, hey, I can do this. So you learn something about yourself and persevering because it's very easy, as you know, to write and put something away and not get back to it and be distracted. And it's in the book, The Visitor, because Sally's a writer. Today, to be distracted, it's so easy. I mean, you get on your phone and you start scrolling through TikTok or Instagram and 2 hours have gone by, and it's hard to really make that effort. And so to do that and finish out the first novel, I think it sort of said something to me that, hey, you could do this and you could do it again.
Wonderful. I read that you are a member of the Horror Writers Association. What is that? Is that something our writers out there can join?
Yeah, it's a consortium of, it's a consortium of writers, and the Horror Writers Association promotes dark literature. Anybody can join. There's different levels depending on your professional sort of level in terms of what you've had published, screenplays sold, podcasts written, and so forth. They do a lot to promote horror writers. And they put out a big awards at the end of the year called the Bram Stoker Awards. He's the fellow who wrote Dracula. And yeah, it's something everybody should go and look into and go to the website.
I noticed there was classes. So that's something that the writers, or there was a university. So do they help educate?
They will provide help writers. There's mentorships programs. Like I said, there's a lot of different levels. Yeah. They help promote your work a little as well. So it's definitely something people should check out.
Right. And writers out there, if you are a horror writer, definitely check it out. If we can help you with anything here on the Writers Hangout, is just grab it any opportunity. Go on there, look at it. You don't like it, just sign off. It's a tough road out there, and grab all the tools you can.
That's great advice. Yeah.
Is there anything that you have watched or read that you'd like to recommend to our listeners? Are you a Love Island fan? What's going on?
I don't think I'm a Love Island fan. I'm a New Yorker, which means I'm a sports nut, so I'm always watching sports. But I do go to the movies still. I'm one of those who still hits the theaters. I did read Rick Rubin's book. He's the producer of everything from Jay-Z to the Beastie Boys.
I downloaded it.
Yeah. And I really,
one word
I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
What is the name of it?
I think it's called The Creative Way. And there's such great advice in it. And some of it is simple as like, take a walk, go outside and take a walk. And he talks about sometimes when he was in the studio, just to leave and walk.
To me, Rick Rubin is somebody, if you go, hey, call that cat over, you'd all know you're talking about Rick Rubin.
Yeah. That cat. Yeah. Because of his beard and his kind of chill vibe. And he's always got the sunglasses on. But stuff like follow your instincts. And I don't know. I think for anybody who's in the creative field, it's a really good read. So I'd recommend that to
maybe when I finish reading it, you and I can talk about it. And maybe that cool cat Rick will join us.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Could you tell our writers how to get The Visitor?
Yeah, sure. It's available on Amazon, and you could download it to your Kindle. It's also, there's a paperback you could order. And if you're on KU, which is Kindle Unlimited, you could just download it as part of your program there.
You are the first writer to point that out on Amazon and Kindle. That's a good avenue to get it.
Definitely. The paperback is available now, and it's officially able to be downloaded. But check it out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Would you like to share your social media with our writers out there who would like to follow you?
Sure. Google Kevin, Kevin Bachar. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Kevin Pangolin, Pangolin. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I have a YouTube channel. What I do is I create a lot of book trailers. Every day I put out a new book trailer for The Visitor or for Cursed or Dread or Creep, my other books. So you can see what my book trailers are like. New one every day. They're little short horror stories. Yeah, they're fun.
When it comes to Instagram, I don't know how to share anything, and I've never bought like a third-party sharer. I know you could do that. But if you can send me some of the trailers, I'd love to put it up on the Writers Hangout.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'll send you a couple links and you take a look.
Yeah, writers, again, you grab every opportunity out there to get your stuff out in front of people. And,
exactly. Yeah. Promote yourself. Don't ever feel like, oh, I'm being so forward, I shouldn't do this. Somebody might watch it and say, hey, I want to talk to that person.
Kevin, thank you so much for being on the Writers Hangout.
Oh, thank you for having me again, Sandy. It's such a pleasure and wonderful time speaking with you.
And that's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Your positive feedback will help us keep the show going so we can continue bringing you more future episodes. Remember, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards with executive producer Kristin Overn, producers Sandy Adomaitis, and myself, Terry Sampson. And our music is composed by Ethan Stoller.